The story begins in the capital of the Necrocoaries in an era when gods, spirits, and sorcery ruled the world, where the last demon lord battled with his army of skeletons against the 6 heroes and other humans who received healing powers from winged beings. After some time at war in the civil year of 447 of the Holy God, the demon lord realizes that he was being defeated after being reminded by his 2 subjects, a girl named Sherry and a wolf named Blackus, that all the other domains had already fallen, including the castle of Azra, the lord of the underworld, with that fortress being the only one left, the reason the 6 heroes were giving their all to make their domains fall. They still had the help of magic beings like the great sage Arkal, which irritates the demon lord, but being the last one left, he thinks he has to ensure that the promise he made is fulfilled and accepts his defeat because as an undead, he can resurrect 1,000 years later to reclaim his throne. In the future, 2 girls, Celia and Regina, enter a ruin to fulfill a mission of locating the Nest of the Voids. They report what they see to a girl through a communicator, and she reminds them that self-defense is the only permitted form of combat. After a while, they report that they were already on the 7th floor of the ruin and hadn't found any magical anomalies related to the voids yet. The girl in the communicator responds that as soon as they find the nest, they should leave immediately since it's a reconnaissance mission, but at that moment, they lose communication. Although they were getting deeper into the ruin, making the return difficult, they realize they must continue because the voids make their nests in the depths of underground ruins. A bit further, they find some creatures resembling statues and deduce they are personal items buried with the deceased, wondering if there was an important king buried nearby. They follow the path and find a large portal that causes their devices to beep. Celia notices some writing on the door and takes a photo of the text without knowing what language it is. While she analyzes the writing, Regina goes to explore another part of the ruin. Alone, Celia feels like she's seen that before, and when she touches the writing, the door immediately lights up and opens, startling her. She takes out her weapon as a precaution, and the lights reveal the area. As she approaches, her device shuts down from being overwhelmed by the energy, and Celia notices that someone is trapped inside the crystal. In the past, the demon lord met a girl named Roselia, to whom he had made that promise. She tells him that a millennium from now, when the stars fall from the sky, a vessel for his power will appear in the form of a human child, and it is his duty to find it. After reminding him of his task, she departs to await the day they will reunite. Back in the present, as Celia fires shots at the crystal, trying to break it and save the person inside, the demon lord is puzzled by the presence of a person there since the magical barrier seal should have made that place completely inaccessible. He wonders if 1,000 years have already passed since the reincarnation ritual seems to have worked and uses a language analysis spell to understand what the girl is saying, thinking she might be a tomb raider. He decides to punish the intruder and breaks the crystal, freeing himself and startling Celia. She grabs her weapon as a precaution and the lights come on, revealing the area. As she approaches, her device shuts down from being overwhelmed by the energy and Celia notices that someone is trapped inside the crystal. At that moment, the demon lord realizes his appearance, and upon looking in the reflection through a piece of crystal, he is shocked to see that he looks like a young boy. He is baffled as to why he has returned to the world in his Leonis, a hero form. Celia examines him to see if he's injured, leaving the demon embarrassed. She thinks his memory must be confused from being trapped in the crystal and embraces him to try to calm him, promising to keep him safe. Despite considering her behavior disrespectful, the demon finds her embrace strangely pleasant and faints shortly after. Sometime later, the demon eats a dried grape biscuit, recognizing that the texture isn't bad but finding it pathetic that his current body, a lord like himself, would lose consciousness from hunger. He also finds himself oddly drawn to the girl's disrespectful attitude. Finally, Celia introduces herself as Roselia Ray Crystalia, a 15-year-old swordswoman in training and a member of the 18th Platoon of the Excalibur Academy in the 7 Assault Garden. However, the demon can only understand her name and age but thinks of using the girl to gather information about the current world. She then asks for his name, and the demon introduces himself as Leonis Magnus. He thinks she will recognize his name, imagining that it must have been passed down through generations as an inspiring legend. However, she only finds the name pleasant, making Leonis realize he was mistaken. Celia asks his age, and he says he must be around 10 years old, making her think that the boy must have been kidnapped by someone since there's no way a child like him could have reached that ruin alone, deducing it must have been a void. Leonis asks what a void is, making her increasingly certain that he has suffered some form of amnesia. Meanwhile, Regina continues to explore the ruin and notices something moving. She quickly arms herself, activating her Excalibur. At the same time, Celia explains to Leonis that the voids are humanity's enemies that suddenly appeared 64 years ago, and nobody knows what they are or what they want, with one theory being that they came from another world and were named voids because they signify nothing. Leonis finds that explanation to be the vaguest he has ever heard, and Celia continues, saying she came to the ruin on an investigation, as void nests are usually found in ancient ruins like that one. At that moment, Leonis realizes he forgot to ask the most important question and inquires about the current year in the calendar of the holy god to see if the 1,000 years have indeed passed since the battle. However, she responds that they are in the year 64 of the unified human calendar. Suddenly, there is a loud noise and Regina communicates with Celia, saying she has detected a colossal void. Then everything shakes and she shields Leonis to protect him. At that moment, an ogre-class void appears, breaking a wall, and Leonis wonders why it's called an ogre when it doesn't look like one. Celia starts shooting at the void with no effect, and Leonis thinks about taking matters into his own hands since destroying that place disrespects his former companions who were buried there. However, he's not yet accustomed to his small body and ends up falling. Regina appears and attacks the void with her weapon, launching a powerful attack at the creature, but unfortunately, it resists the damage, making Leonis wonder because that attack was on par with a Phase 4 explosion spell. Regina asks Celia to leave the battle to her and to get out of the ruin. So after telling her friend to be careful, Celia runs toward the exit with Leonis. As she runs, he thinks that thanks to his current fragile body, he's not in a position to restore his former kingdom, and to make matters worse, the voids cause a lot of damage to his domain. Since Celia is his only source of information, he decides to hide the fact that he's the demon lord to make it easier to get answers from her. Suddenly, a crystal falls in their path, revealing itself to be a wyvern-class void. The creature prepares to attack, and Leonis thinks about making it regret destroying his domain. However, Celia pushes him away in an attempt to protect the boy and takes a fatal blow. As Celia meets her end, she speaks with difficulty, telling Leonis to go to Regina so she can take him to safety, and apologizes for not being able to keep him safe as she promised. Those are her final words. Leonis thinks about how foolish he was to believe that he couldn't withstand such a weak attack, remembering when he met Rosalia during his time as a weak human hero. Two more void creatures of the same class as the previous one emerge and start attacking Leonis, unable to inflict any damage on him. He finds it ridiculous that he's feeling the loss of the girl, considering he let her survive only to gather information, although he admits to having liked her a bit. Determined to make the creatures pay for their actions, Leonis grabs his staff. He uses a gravity manipulation spell to crush the first void, then eliminates another with ice thorns, and the last one with a fire attack. After defeating the three, he's puzzled that their bones resisted a Phase 8 spell, reflecting on how his magical powers are now only about a third as strong as before in his new body. Leonis contemplates that, as a demon lord, he shouldn't care about the life of a simple human. However, Celia gave her life to keep him safe, making him recognize the girl's courage. He attempts to use a healing spell, despite it not being his specialty, as it belongs to the realm of death. Slowly, Celia starts to heal, a symbol appearing on her leg and her eye turning red. She gradually returns to life, while Leonis thinks she won't be pleased when she discovers what he did to her. Meanwhile, Regina finally manages to defeat the ogre-class void and tries to communicate with Celia. Leonis is surprised by humans' ability to develop such complex magical technology as that long-distance communication device. Celia regains consciousness, relieved to see that Leonis is safe, which surprises him since she's more concerned about him than herself. However, she soon realizes she's still alive, and Leonis invents that her injuries weren't as severe as they seemed, explaining that he used a healing spell. Celia shows no knowledge of such spells. Leonis finds this strange but understands that humans unable to use spells rely on advanced magic. Celia then asks if the healing spell was some sort of Excalibur power, explaining that her academy documented cases of Excaliburs with healing abilities. Leonis says he doesn't know much about it, and Celia reveals that when the voids first appeared decades ago, mysterious abilities emerged in children everywhere. Most of these abilities took the form of weapons, powers they used to fight the voids, which is why they were called Excaliburs. She explains that despite not fully understanding how they worked, it seemed they incorporated the personality of their user. The weapon Draghowl is Regina's Excalibur, but Celia reveals she hasn't been blessed with her own Excalibur yet. At that moment, Regina appears, concerned about Celia's wound. Only then does Celia remember to ask Leonis about the void that attacked them. He invents that it cowered in fear and disappeared when he looked up, and Celia believes him because the voids often acted in ways they couldn't comprehend. Leaving the ruins, Celia briefs Regina on what she learned about the boy, and the three of them ride together on a motorcycle with Leonis sitting behind Celia. Regina finally introduces herself to him, explaining that she's Celia's maid. On the way, she begins teasing the boy, making Leonis uncomfortable with how a powerful undead king is being ridiculed by a simple girl. They finally arrive at a place that Celia explains is humanity's fortress, Built to resist the voids, the castle that houses various holy swordsmen and the blades they use for attack called the 7th Assault Garden. Seeing that fortress, Leonis has no doubt that he is indeed 1,000 years in the future. 6 years ago, in the 3rd Assault Garden Fortress, humans suffered a massive void attack. Some citizens, including the elderly and children, took refuge in a shelter, and Celia and Regina were among them. Both were terrified, but Celia tried to calm her friend by saying that her father was leading the battle directly, and she was sure they would win because he, along with her mother, siblings, and knights, had never lost a battle. However, as the situation grew scarier, they started chatting as a distraction. Celia mentioned that once everything was over, she would get her Excalibur to fight alongside her father, just like her brothers. She also said she would start attending the training school next week. She continued talking about the importance of acquiring knowledge and how her father gave her a stack of books. Despite her efforts, she felt she would age before finishing them all because there were so many. She also mentioned her mother planning a party on the day of her enrollment ceremony. As the situation worsened, Celia panicked, wanting to run to her family, but Regina held her and reassured her, making them go back to talking about the party, with Celia crying and promising that everything would be fine. After a while, the shelter's doors finally opened. The place was in ruins, and the thousands of Excalibur users had been decimated, including Celia's family. As people gathered the few survivors, Celia cried, apologizing to Regina for lying when she said everything would be fine. Now Celia and Regina arrive with Leonis at the 7th Assault Garden Fortress, where the two girls lived. Celia promises herself that she will never lie again. Leonis is impressed by the place, and Regina explains that Assault Garden's mission is to navigate the seas and serve as the front line against the voids, leaving Leonis even more impressed by the fact that such a large place can move. Afterwards, Celia reports what she found in her investigation at the ruins over the phone and says she'll take the rejected boy to his dormitory, mentioning that he already seemed to have an Excalibur. This surprises Regina because Leonis is too young to have an Excalibur. Celia explains that they called people expelled from their countries due to void attacks rejected. Celia tells Leonis that he will be living at the Excalibur Academy, an institution that trains Excalibur users where all children with powers live in exchange for guaranteed life. Then Regina says she'll go shopping to prepare dinner later, and Celia explains to Leonis that people from outside need to be verified before entering the fortress. She tells him to go there and meet her at the exit, leaving the boy alone. Leonis takes the opportunity to enter the bathroom to avoid being seen and thinks about how, instead of executing his plan to gather the Demon King's army to eradicate the human race, he's now among humans who have advanced a lot in 1,000 years in the form of a child and has to deal with monsters called voids. He then summons his two partners, Blackus and Sherry, who are surprised by Leonis' new appearance, as they met him when he had already become the Demon King. He explains to the two that they are in Immobile Fortress City number 7, indicating that there are 6 others like it, and that the world has changed a lot in the last 1,000 years he was away. He wants the two of them to investigate the city without drawing attention, while he infiltrates the human training school to gather information and supplies for his body, which now needed food. And so he sets them free and goes to the location Celia mentioned, where he triggers the system alarm due to his magical energy. Immediately, he conceals it, stopping the alarm and setting himself free. Next, Leonis receives an ID card, and Celia, who is waiting for him, takes it and snaps a photo to send to the academy, explaining that it was necessary to register his features to gain entry into the school and receive official identification. She keeps his eye to prevent him from losing it, and before they head to the dormitory, she decides to give Leonis a tour of the academy. Along the way, he notices that the city is quite peaceful despite being on the front lines, and Celia explains that the 7th Assault Garden has never been breached by the voids. Arriving at the academy, she shows him the military command center, and then the classroom, auditorium, library, and the laboratory, explaining that they also had a dance room and an entertainment area, in addition to the students' dormitories, which were close to a large swimming pool. Leonis asks why they have things like a dance room and a pool, and Celia explains that Excalibur is a weapon that originates from the heart of its user, and if the person is sad, they can't achieve its full power, which happened in the second fortress that only had military training facilities. She continues to introduce the academy, showing where his evaluation will take place the following day. Suddenly, she feels weak. Nearby, 2 students are practicing, and she remembers that after resting, she needs to train to acquire Excalibur as quickly as possible. They continue their path, passing by 2 girls, and Celia explains that they are near the female dormitory. Then, a guy named Musil Rhodes appears, and Leonis immediately senses that he and Celia don't get along. He notices her injury and taunts her, saying that she once again went on a mission beyond her capacity. Upon seeing Leonis, he laughs, mentioning that in addition to leading the rowdy group, she takes care of children. Celia explains that Leonis is an Excalibur user and Musil teases him as well, but Leonis decides to let it go because he doesn't want to draw attention. Musil then invites Celia to join his group, reasoning that if she joined his team, she wouldn't have to endanger herself on missions and could stay at the academy without having to manifest power, just like the other girls who accompany him. Of course, she declines the offer and continues on her way, but Musil becomes agitated and grabs Celia by her hair. Leonis decides to intervene and uses his power to make the guy fall to the ground. He approaches Musil and tells him that idiots like him shouldn't touch someone's hair. Terrified of Leonis, Musil activates his Excalibur, but another girl appears and reminds him that it's prohibited to use Excalibur without permission, especially in an area of the female dormitory. She threatens to report the situation to the supervisor if he doesn't leave immediately. Musil departs and the girl greets Celia, introducing herself to Leonis as Elfine Philip, an analyst on Celia's team. Leonis notices that her Excalibur is different from the others. Elfine apologizes to Celia for not joining her on the mission, explaining that she didn't have much time because she had to analyze some data for the supervisor, including abnormal magical energy reactions in the ocean. She mentions that she was waiting for the elite investigation team to gather more data on the matter because she couldn't make sense of the data she already had. Suddenly, Celia feels dizzy again, and Leonis understands what's happening to her. They head back to the dormitory to rest, and Leonis notices that their dorm is much older than the others he saw in the city. Celia explains that their assignments are based on the Excalibur user team's performance, since the Academy highly values achievements. High-performing teams can move to newer dormitories, some of which even have jacuzzis, although Leonis has no idea what a jacuzzi is. They enter the dorm, and Celia shows him Regina's room, but she's already asleep since she used her Excalibur's power, which consumes a lot of energy from the user. Then they go to Celia's room, and it's only when they arrive that Leonis realizes that it's a girl's dorm. However, Celia reassures him, saying that there's no problem with him being a child. She asks him to take a shower first. While he's getting ready to shower, Celia asks if he'll want to join her team when the verification of his Excalibur is completed. However, when Leonis sneezes, she decides it's better to continue their conversation after the shower. As he turns on the shower, Leonis thinks that it must be some kind of water and fire magic to keep the water warm. He then starts soaping his hair, not having a clue about how it works. Shortly after, Celia enters the bathroom and tells him to use the shampoo on his head. This makes the boy quite nervous because she entered the bathroom without any notice, right when he was starting to relax in the shower. She helps him wash his hair and continues their conversation, emphasizing that he is free to choose any team he wants to join. She points out that his healing power is valuable and high-level teams will definitely be interested in recruiting him. She advises him to choose one of them since her team is not the best fit for him, given that she hasn't awakened her Excalibur's power yet. Nevertheless, she tells him that he's very welcome if he decides to be part of her team, even though she isn't the strongest. Leonis admires Celia's honesty and sense of justice, and he asks why she fights so hard when she has the option to seek protection without risking her life, especially since she hasn't awakened her Excalibur's power. She replies that she doesn't want to be merely protected, she wants to fight directly. At this moment, Celia starts feeling dizzy again and suddenly collapses. Leonis touches her leg, causing the same symbol to appear on her that appeared on him when he used his healing magic. This makes her eyes turn red, and with Leonis' assistance, she gets up and feeds on his blood. After coming to her senses, she's frightened and doesn't understand why she did that. Leonis explains that he lied when he said he healed her with his Excalibur's power, revealing that he can't bring someone back from the brink, meaning that the girl had actually passed away. 2 years ago, at the Excalibur Academy, Celia trained diligently in the sword technique she had learned from her brothers. It was something etched in her heart, and she hoped that her Excalibur would be a sword. By training in this technique, she aspired to awaken her Excalibur, as it was a power connected to the soul. During that time, Musil had already been bothering the girl, trying to convince Celia that training was futile, and that she should join his platoon. As usual, Celia declined his offer. Since Musil wouldn't take no for an answer, Regina stepped in, threatening him with her Excalibur, even though it was forbidden to use it without authorization. As Musil departed with his platoon, Regina told Celia that when she managed to awaken her Excalibur, cowards like him wouldn't bother her anymore. However, Celia revealed that she didn't desire the Excalibur for that reason. Currently, Celia woke up after a long period of being unconscious when she learned she was no longer alive. Upon seeing Leonis, she inquired about his true identity. Leonis explained that he was a sorcerer who had resurrected her. In his era, magic energy was used by people to cast spells. He clarified that he had brought her back not with the power of Excalibur, but with a level 10 spell. He informed her that she was now the strongest undead in the world, the queen of vampires, relying on blood to recharge her magical energy. Leonis noticed her sadness and apologized, explaining that it was the only way to save her. Celia then shared that when she was 9 years old, her homeland had been attacked by the Void, and she had lost her entire family. Her family, all Excalibur users, had fought to the end to protect the city. The catastrophic event was known as the Stampede, and after that day, she and Regina were taken to the academy because everyone expected Celia to be an Excalibur user like the rest of her family. However, since she couldn't awaken her power, she believed that if she faced a Void, her Excalibur would appear, so she started venturing on dangerous missions. Leonis understood Celia's frustration for not being able to awaken her Excalibur on her last mission. She then asked if she could still have her Excalibur as a vampire, and he replied that he didn't know but believed that she would become even stronger as an undead. Suddenly, the boy's stomach made a loud noise, and Celia realized he hadn't eaten since yesterday. They went to a restaurant, and there Celia asked if, as a vampire, she still needed to eat. Leonis explained that a high-level vampire could eat normally, though it took a while for food to convert into magical energy. She then asked what he wanted to eat, and since Leonis was unfamiliar with most of the dishes, he said a bread would do. Celia mentioned that this would keep his nutrition low, and he found it amusing that a vampire was talking about nutrition. This made Celia feel a bit uneasy, and Leonis apologized, realizing that she would have difficulty accepting the situation as she hadn't become undead by choice, unlike him who had done it in his past by Roselia's invitation. Then she offered to pay for his meal, assuming the boy had no money. However, Leonis took one of his gold coins and mentioned that just one of those could buy the entire restaurant. He thought Celia was surprised by his wealth, but in fact he was the one surprised because in current times everyone used magical-based credits, making his 2,000 gold coins worthless. At that moment, a girl named Sakuya entered the restaurant with 2 men who were demanding payment from her. Despite Sakuya's assertion that she had already paid her debt, they continued insisting for more money. She asked them to wait a week for her to gather more, but the men were looking for an opportunity to exploit the situation for something else's payment. Immediately, she fought them, making it clear that she had already set her payment deadline and they should return the following week. Then Sakuya approached Celia because she was one of the girls in her platoon. Celia learned that Sakuya had been suspended due to her poor grades. Sakuya explained that she had indeed been suspended and had come to the city to have some fun. She mentioned that the 2 men were henchmen from the casino she visited. She noticed the ancient coin Leonis was holding and asked if he was the boy Elfine had mentioned to her. Celia said that he was now the first line of defense for her platoon, having defeated a Void by himself. Sakuya introduced herself to Leonis, and then they sat down to eat. Leonis realized that Sakuya's uniform was different from the other students, and she explained that it was a traditional outfit from her village in Oran, a memento of her brother. She revealed that her entire clan in the village had been killed by the Voids, and Leonis understood that her goal was to seek revenge against these creatures. Shortly after, 2 other female students from the academy came to demand another debt from Sakuya, and Celia scolded her friend as her grades were poor due to her gambling addiction. Later, Leonis met the supervisor named Disgrace Alt, who was going to conduct a test to determine the type of Excalibur he possessed. She asked him to retrieve his weapon, and Leonis did so, summoning his sealed Sin's scepter. Disgrace inquired about the nature of that Excalibur's power, and he replied, somewhat confused, that it was a support type. This led the supervisor to conclude that it was a versatile Excalibur. Then Leonis noticed some robots in the area, and Celia explained that they were Void simulators that would battle him. The supervisor explained that as Leonis had a support weapon, he would need a partner on the front line. In a matter of seconds, Leonis disintegrated the metal of all the simulators, even though he had held back his power. Disgrace was perplexed by how he had accomplished this with his support Excalibur, and to cover up, he suggested he had struck a weakness in the robots. This drew the attention of the other students, and the supervisor decided to prepare a replacement for the simulators. Musil appeared and requested to be a replacement. As a level 1 Excalibur user, he had the right to assume that role. He took the weapons of the girls in his platoon as his Excalibur Dominion made the girls a part of his weapon. Leonis was fine with the arrangement and asked if it was just a matter of defeating Musil and the 4 girls to pass the test. However, Celia had no idea about her own power, so she requested the supervisor's permission to help him, as she was his guardian. Musil agreed, but on the condition that if she lost, she would have to join his platoon. Leonis accepted the condition as long as Musil never bothered Celia again if he lost. Musil agreed to the terms, and Celia questioned Leonis' decision, but he assured her that he wouldn't lose his guardian. The fight began, and Celia showed her sword skills, taking on the girls from Musil's platoon. He then ordered one of the girls to attack Leonis. He concentrated to control his power better, as this time he wasn't fighting against simulators. The demon summoned the Hand of Death from the realm of shadows to protect him from the girl's attack and immobilize her, causing her to fall. Meanwhile, the other girls continued attacking Celia, and she asked how long Musil would hide behind them. Regina rushed to the room where they were dueling, realizing it was the day of Leonis' test. She couldn't understand why Celia was fighting. After defeating all the girls in Musil's platoon, Celia faced Musil. However, he quickly used his Excalibur to dominate her. Celia was paralyzed and couldn't move, and Musil enjoyed the situation. He said he would deal with the boy first, and then attend to her. However, Celia's worry for Leonis led her to finally awaken her Excalibur, impressing everyone with her inherited sword from her family. Not only did she awaken, but she also broke free from Musil's domination. He was terrified, and before he could dominate her again, Celia shattered his Excalibur, freeing the 4 girls from his control. Defeated, Musil admitted his defeat, and Leonis passed his test despite having done very little in the duel. Later, Celia thanked Leonis, and he referred to her as his familiar again, telling her there was no need to thank him. Celia asked what a familiar was, and he explained that it was a protective creature for its master. She then said she would continue to protect him, finding the situation amusing. She then asked Leonis to make her even stronger, and he expressed his desire to do exactly that. Later, they all gathered to celebrate Celia's Excalibur awakening and Leonis' admission to the academy. Sakuya inquired about her weapon, and Celia explained it was a lightweight and sharp sword. This led everyone to suggest names for the Excalibur, but Celia preferred to choose one only when she fully mastered it. They then welcomed Leonis, who had become their new comrade. Sakuya asked in which room he would sleep, as all the rooms in the dormitory had been converted into storage. All 3 girls offered their rooms to Leonis, saying he could share the space with them. Celia desperately claimed he would stay in her room, as it would make it easier for both of them to keep their secret. However, she couldn't reveal the truth, so Leonis said it made sense for him to stay with her because she had found him and she was his guardian. Everyone understood the reason. Later, Leonis went to Elfina's room for her to record his biometric data in the academy. There, she explained that her Excalibur was used to observe and analyze data, although it had once been used for combat. She mentioned that after losing her 2 companions to a void on a mission, her Excalibur lost its original power, and because she couldn't fight anymore, Celia invited her to join her platoon. At that moment, she finished registering Leonis, and he noticed a map on the computer. He asked to take a look, so she made a backup for him, and he analyzed the map in his room while Celia took her shower. With the map, Leonis realized a connection between the voids and the battlefield where his fleet and the Great Sage had fought. He then called for Blackus to retrieve all the information he had gathered so far. Blackus informed him that in the underground of that floating island, there was a large magical crystal buried, which humans called the Magic Forge, and used it to power the entire city. Leonis thought of using this technology to their advantage and asked Blackus to continue his investigation. Then Sherry appeared and showed him a food item called a donut. She had various types of food they didn't know about to show to Leonis. However, she mentioned that from what she could see, no one knew about the Demon King or the War of 1,000 years ago. Leonis had suspected as much, but it seemed strange that such a significant war had been forgotten. At that moment, Sherry heard the shower and asked if Leonis had really turned Celia into a familiar displaying jealousy. Suddenly, Celia turned off the shower and Sherry quickly left. Nearby, some men explored the ocean and reported that they hadn't found any signs of the void so far. Suddenly, they saw something strange and were attacked by several tentacles from a creature. In a flashback from the year 432, in the vicinity of the city of Shaidan, Leonis, who was still an Excalibur hero, was escorting a miner to a location where there had been some monster attacks. Leonis had been working as a vigilant in the city's outskirts for 16 years. The miner comments on how it's still possible to be attacked by monsters even with a few workers in the mine, but feels safe being escorted by an Excalibur hero. Leonis then mentions that His Majesty had already given him the order to protect the entire area. The miner finds Leonis an impressive hero and expresses a wish for the other 6 heroes to be out there killing monsters like Leonis, instead of staying in the Imperial capital. Leonis laughs and says he just toys with those creatures, but it would be fun if they could tame those monsters. The miner is surprised to hear this, especially from the hero who defeated the Demon King Zorbatis. They then arrive at the mine area, and Leonis asks where the monsters are, but he realizes that the miner he was escorting has disappeared, leaving him alone. The situation starts to get strange, and when Leonis thinks about drawing his sword, 3 mages appear and mobilize him with magic. He realizes that he has fallen into a trap. Several armed men arrive and restrain Leonis with hooks to prevent him from escaping, while others position themselves with spears and fatally wound him. The men comment on how Leonis had made them very worried, but ended up dying too easily. The reason for the attack was that Leonis had gained more popular support than the king himself, clearly showing that he had been the victim of a betrayal. The men then leave Leonis injured, saying he could have saved himself if he had accepted a bribe. A while later, the goddess Rosalia appears to Leonis. They discuss how Leonis knew about the trap but did nothing because he doesn't blame humans for what happened. Leonis says he doesn't care about the state of the world because in the end he will remain as he is. Goddess Rosalia says she has always watched over Leonis and won't give up on him because he sees things differently. She expresses her interest in him and wants Leonis to belong to her. Leonis then wakes up thinking about Rosalia. He remembers that he was supposed to meet her and rebuild his army of demons, as that is his goal now, after 1,000 years. Leonis notices bite marks on his neck. He goes to Celia's bed and orders her to wake up. Celia, without understanding, immediately gets up at Leonis' command. She says she doesn't know why she woke up so suddenly, but Leonis explains that he placed the mark of obedience on her when he turned her into a vampire, making her his familiar. Leonis explains that this means she has to obey his commands and protect him from any danger. He then asks Celia why she fed on him without permission. Celia apologizes and explains that she couldn't resist her hunger during the night. Leonis says he doesn't mind Celia feeding on him, but that she should ask for permission next time. She understands and agrees to let him know if the situation arises again. Celia then receives a call from Finette. She says she noticed something strange and wanted to inform Celia. She explains that there was a strategy discussion meeting that was very unusual, happening early in the morning on a day off. Finette explains that she doesn't know the content of the meeting but believes it is related to an ongoing investigation. Celia asks Finette if she had investigated the strait in the sea near the city, and Finette says yes, but she hadn't found much information so far, but she would continue to update Celia if anything happened. Celia then tells Leonis that since it was a day off from school, she would like to take a stroll with him through the city's streets. He jokes that since she fed on him the previous night, it's natural for Celia to want to burn off some energy, which makes the girl feel embarrassed. In the meeting at the 7th Assault Garden headquarters, several generals gather to discuss the missing and uncommunicative investigation team. One of the leaders wonders if the entire 13th squad was annihilated. Meanwhile, another leader comments that even though the commander traveled to the capital just a year and a half ago, there have been many problems and void attacks in his absence. An analyst then mentions that according to transmission data, the presence of a void was registered for 3 seconds, prompting one of the generals to recognize that it's common for voids to appear briefly and cause significant damage. Still, doing so in 3 seconds is a very short time. They discuss the possibility that the cause of the investigation team's disappearance might have been a void load, not a common void, which could signify a new threat. This reminds one of the leaders of the tragedy that occurred at the 3rd Fortress Assault Garden 6 years ago, the same island where Celia and Regina lived. The commander says he hasn't forgotten the tragedy, which is why they've increased the defenses of the 7th Assault Garden, now having a much larger number of sacred swords than before. The civilian representative also says they are prepared and could be evacuated in the midst of chaos if necessary. One of the generals asks if the 7th Assault Garden would be ready to move if needed, and the analyst responds that they have a stability rate of 90%. However, one of the generals doesn't like the idea because the students' abilities are not meant for fleeing from voids, but for engaging them in combat. The leaders then receive a call from the overall commander, who has decided to initiate a new investigation and instructs the leaders not to attack the void until the right moment. They prepare to assemble 3 new elite teams for the new investigation, posting a notice to prepare those involved. Meanwhile, Celia starts training with her new sword, battling training robots, simulating voids. Leonis watches the fight and compliments her fencing skills. Celia explains that she's been training since childhood thanks to her family. However, fighting the training robots isn't helping her improve her combat skills much. Because of this, Leonis has the idea to give Celia more suitable opponents to face. He summons his staff and uses magic to conceal the training field where he and Celia are. Then, Leonis summons a small army of skeletons, which initially startles Celia, as she realizes that the children in this world have never seen a skeleton in their lives. Leonis tells Celia she can defeat as many as she wants. She then takes on the skeletons, defeating several with her sword strikes and acrobatics. As Celia demonstrates her ability to handle the skeletons very well, Leonis summons more of his army to increase the training's difficulty. She manages to handle each of them quite well. However, after eliminating all of them, Celia becomes quite tired and concludes her training for the day, with Leonis storing the skeletons back where they came from. Near the dormitory, Sakuya walks happily after winning her bets, something that hadn't happened in a while. Suddenly, she spots Blackus, Leonis' familiar dog. She's impressed with Blackus' fur quality, and as he doesn't have a collar, she assumes he's a stray dog. Thinking it's just a common animal, since Blackus continues to act like a dog, Sakuya gives him a ridiculous name. She believes the dog liked the name and decides to feed him. Then, she enters the dormitory and says goodbye to Blackus, using the name she gave him. Inside the dormitory, Regina has made sweet potato sweets as it's a day off and she wants to please Leonis. Faina tastes the sweets and says they're delicious. Sakuya then enters and tells them about her new friend she just met, explaining that he's a big dog with fluffy fur, and she named him Furry Iron Blackie. Faina gets to the point and tells them she's following the missing investigation team in the sea, and they haven't returned or communicated for hours. In the meantime, Celia and Leo are out for a motorcycle ride in the city. Nearby, Sherry is working in her new job as a helper in a small market to afford all the food she wants to give Leonis. Sherry's boss asks her to help fry some potatoes, starting with the cutting part. Sherry says the knife he has isn't very sharp and decides to use her own knife. She quickly cuts everything, leaving the potatoes, the bowl, and the cutting board in pieces. Naturally, her boss freaks out and asks her what on earth she was doing, but Sherry doesn't even realize what she did wrong as she had cut the potatoes as he asked. Since it's not a good idea to leave her in charge of preparing the dishes, her boss asks Sherry to clean the front of the store. She complies, but as soon as she reaches the door, she sees Celia and Leonis together. She decides to stop at the market to buy some cakes, telling Leonis not to eat anything yet because they're a gift. This leaves Sherry quite jealous. She secretly spies on the two through the door, wondering where they're going. Celia and Leonis then arrive at a house, and at the same time, a group of children comes running out of the building, happy to see Celia. She explains to Leonis that these children live there as orphans, and the place also serves as a restaurant where she occasionally works part-time. Inside the restaurant, the children have fun, and Celia tells everyone about Leonis. She then mentions that he already has an Excalibur, which surprises everyone as the boy is the same age as them. The boys find Leonis incredible because of this. Celia says she brought donuts and food for everyone. Leonis understands that Celia wants to protect that place because it's important to her, which makes him think that he no longer has a place to protect since his kingdom no longer exists. Meanwhile, the new investigation team dies to gather more information about the supposed void. They arrive at the location where the previous team disappeared, but unfortunately, they can't find any sign of the creature. However, inside the city's tunnels, a worker hears vibrations coming from the underground walls. Finne notices the same on her analysis equipment. Two workers then enter a warehouse filled with roots similar to the ones that attacked the divers. They decide to investigate what it is, and we see a void watching them from among the root branches. Meanwhile, in the restaurant, the children are all happily eating in the company of Celia and Leonis, who is lost in thought, reminiscing about his past. With a brief journey back in time to the period when Leonis was still a young man in his human form, exactly the same as he is now in his current life. This was long before the events of the Great War. This is the walled city on the border of the kingdom of Laudnas in the year 428, according to the sacred calendar. And right from the start, these buddies with a trollish look are invading the walled city, bringing a lot of panic and fear to all the people in the city. These guys are quite large. You can see that the houses seem to become small compared to their size. And from a safe distance, there's Leonis with all his youth, along with two other heroes of that time. There's Terras Resurrectia giving an attack order to the staff, Lord Aracal de Gradios, who decides to eliminate the trolls right there within the city walls, even if it means sacrificing the population. They make a deal that Terras would bring the humans back to life. She agrees and says that people would suffer now, but later they would be alive again and free from the monsters. Aracal's magic begins to take effect in a sort of heatwave to disintegrate everyone when Leonis makes a move with his sword and dissipates Aracal's magic, saying he couldn't bear to see the people suffering. Then he jumps to confront the big guys alone and starts killing the trolls one by one. This scene is pretty cool. He runs on the rooftops, delivering blows and kicks to the trolls, leaping over all of them. Roselia heals him and fills him with skills, preparing the boy for his future mission. His strength truly impresses everyone, and he takes the opportunity to show off as a hero to the population he just saved. The wizard seemed surprised and at the same time had that touch of envy and named him the hero of the sacred sword, prophesying that all of Leonis' power would bring a tragic fate to himself. Then back to the present day, the strange void that had appeared in the underground structures of the 7th Garden of Assault makes its first movements. In the administrative sector of the fortress, where they command and monitor everything, they keep track of the voids for the safety of the area. They discuss what to do about the appearance of a suspicious void. They designate the suspicious target as UK 6402, which seems to keep appearing and disappearing from the radar. The lieutenant requests that the user of Excalibur from the same platoon as Roselia, Finne, be allowed to demonstrate her analysis and monitor the situation closely. The directors are surprised to learn that the girl is a member of an influential family in the decision-making for fortress weapons development. Finney shows the analyses she made of some vibrations coming from underground, and through wave measurements and comparisons of different times and locations, reveals to the commanders that there are disturbances occurring in the vicinity, and everything suggests it is indeed a void. The commanders become nervous, questioning how it managed to enter through the underground. The technical engineers report that there are some possible entry points, but the data in the underground corridors are correct. There is indeed a presence that went unnoticed by the alarm devices. For some reason, they were not triggered. Finney explains that it might be a very clever void that purposefully reduces its energy to remain silent and inconspicuous. And it doesn't take long before the alarm goes off, indicating danger in the area. The technicians believe it's something akin to plant roots. Regina, who is following everything, is trying to contact Roselia, who is unaware of what's happening and is at the Solar House orphanage. Regina is very worried about the news, and Finney wishes that there aren't too many of them. But there's one down there, and she suggests that everyone stay alert together. Meanwhile, life still seems normal outside. Roselia is at the orphanage with the children, who are pestering the little king. It seems that he unintentionally leaves the girls all embarrassed. They still don't know what's going on. The monitoring teams have sent soldiers to see what's happening down there. They send images, and you can see the tangle in the facility's corridors. But apparently, it's a significant problem, and ordinary weapons won't do. Communication with the first agents sent underground was lost. So it's time to think about maybe evacuating the city, or perhaps strengthening the city's defenses. Alert all the authorities to prepare. The rescue team managed to make contact again, but since the thing is like plant roots and moves quickly and easily, it escapes and roams freely through all the underground facility. They discover the true intention of UK 6402, which is to reach the channel that would give access to the magic furnace, a kind of energy generator that powers the entire place. It could reach the magic furnace and use it to generate an explosion, which would be terrible and likely destroy part of the fortress, so security will have to be reinforced there. The defense system starts to act and destroys the initial void attacks. The teams also try to contain this kind of monster with their tentacle-like branches. Despite all the equipment working well and the teams trying to contain it at all costs, it doesn't seem to be enough. Soon, the equipment is damaged. As a result, they lose contact with the capital and won't be able to inform the general commander of the situation. The vice commander is appointed to give orders on what to do from now on. He orders the 7th Garden of Assault to switch to defensive fortress mode, evacuate all inhabitants, and be prepared to face the Lord Void and the possible explosion of the magic furnace. Roselia and Leonis, still unaware of the danger, remain with the children, who are pestering Leonis for a demonstration of his Excalibur's power. So he decides to give them a small taste of his magic, but the kids don't seem to like it much. Things are tough down in the fortress installations. Everything is being taken over by the Lord Void's roots or branches. Any sudden movement could accidentally hit the magic furnace, which has finally been completely taken over by the Void. Roselia and Leonis quickly realize that something is wrong, and when they go outside, they are met with dark rifts in the sky from which dozens or hundreds of flying voids emerge. The city goes into protection mode and begins an attack against these bizarre enemies. The emergency alarm is activated to notify the Imperial capital of what is happening in the 7th Garden of Assault, and they hope they send reinforcements. It turns out that it will take 3 days for this help to arrive. The question is whether the fortress will hold out for that long. Here you can see how the city was fully equipped for this type of situation, including, to avoid the worst, the energy supply that powers the magic furnace was cut off. They thought of everything to minimize damage. The population is directed into bunkers following safety procedures. What remains now is to rely on the abilities of the students of the Sword Academy, who are now the last hope for everyone to handle this situation. The defense weapons were designed with high technology to withstand these powerful enemies that are now appearing in the form of dragons, and the effects are truly amazing with impressive action. It's a true hail of gunfire everywhere, explosions, and now it's time to go all out. There's no other option. The girls begin to use their weapons and special powers against the invaders. Watching this chaotic scene, Leonis knows that humans will be challenging enemies to defeat. Roselia doesn't think twice and knows she has to keep the children safe in the bunker. Leonis receives a visit, or rather an annoyance, from his somewhat jealous servant, who wishes to protect him, but he quickly sends her away. At that moment, they realize that making the journey to the bunker is no longer safe, so Roselia orders everyone to wait right there and immediately draws her sacred sword. The Demon King feels that she hasn't fully unleashed her potential as the Queen of Vampires and asks if she's afraid. She admits that she is afraid, but fleeing is not an option. The two of them are going to face the voids with all their might. Roselia quickly deals with 2 dragons, while Leonis unleashes fire everywhere. But there's no time to be impressed. The number of monsters keeps increasing, and it makes Leonis recall his past in another era. And now huge creatures resembling ogres appear. The 3 girls are doing their best, But the situation is quite dramatic. It's a sight to behold, with each of them using their abilities to try to destroy as many voids as possible. Succubia with her sword seems to fear nothing, making enormous leaps and destroying the voids one by one. On the other side, Regina with her golden bazooka disintegrates the dragons. However, further away in the smoke, a gigantic void in the form of a hydra or perhaps a multi-headed dragon emerges. The fact is that things are about to get even worse, and it seems to be getting more complicated. But it's beautifully done. The city is under a full-blown attack. Students and machines are trying to handle the situation. However, the dragons are incredibly powerful beings and easily destroy the weapons and buildings. Leonis realizes that the voids have managed to corrupt the dragons and all their powers. This is bad news because it means that common spells won't work to defeat them. So he asks Roselia for help to use a powerful technique. A dilemma arises in Leonis' mind because he realizes that he came back not exactly to protect humans, but to destroy humanity and reclaim his kingdom. However, he decides to stand by the people he now calls family. Leonis invokes his ancient spells with his scepter in hand to direct the attack at the enemies with his powerful technique, these fireballs, that soon turn into a rain of fire. This makes Roselia somewhat scared, but if she stays quiet, nothing will happen to her. As the flames dissipate and the dragon remains unharmed, Leonis realizes that his power doesn't seem to have had much effect. He attributes the reduction in his strength to his limited human body. In an instant, his loyal servant Blackus emerges from below the ground and, like a good watchdog, attacks the huge dragon with a bite to the neck. In a new attempt, the Demon King summons his powers once again and manages to disintegrate the void. But the calm only lasts for a few seconds. The ground begins to shake where the dragon's body fell, and massive rifts in the earth emerge, from which root-like tentacles appear. The Lord Void that had remained underground has entangled Roselia's body with its roots and pulled her into the depths of the crater. Quickly, the creature takes shape and calls Leonis by his name, who at first is surprised but soon realizes that it's an old acquaintance, Aracol de Gradios.